The Pineider Avatar Twin Tank Touchdown is the newest release of the Avatar series. The Twin Tank Touchdown in its name refers to the vacuum filling system. It's a pretty long pen, and it has a gradual taper that starts at the top of the cap that ends at the bottom finial. It's currently available in black, clear, red, green, and the blue version that we have here today, which is also called Neptune. The bottom finial is rounded, and it's made of an opaque resin, which matches the cap. The cap at the top is also rounded, and running through it is the clip. The clip is stylized to look like a quill, and it has a nice big arch with a flare-up at the bottom. It is a spring-loaded clip that makes it very flexible and easy to go over thick notebooks as well as binders. The cap has a gradual taper down to a cap band that's quite thick, and it reads Pineider, made in Italy, and as I rotate it, we can see the Florence skyline. The cap is secured in place with a magnet, and it is a pull-off cap, which reveals a number 6 size stainless steel nib. It reads Pineider on both shoulders. There's kind of a floral pattern, an M for medium, but you can also get this one in a fine. And on the back, we have a black plastic feed. The section is fairly short and is made of the same opaque resin that we saw on the cap and end finial. And then there's a step up to the barrel, which includes the magnet for securing the cap. The barrel is made of a translucent resin that's called ultra resin, which is something that Pineider developed in order to make an extra durable pen. Inside the barrel, we can see the piston rod, which is used as the vacuum filling system. And at the front of the piston rod, we have a chamber, which is the second tank in the Twin Tank Touchdown. This holds a little bit of ink to allow you to use this pen for short notes and maybe about 1 page of writing. If you want to access the rest of the ink that's in the barrel, we're going to have to look back towards the piston knob. We can see there's a dot that lines up with a lock and unlock symbol. Giving the piston knob a twist will release the piston rod and allow ink to flow from the barrel into the section nib and feed. And up here we can see the piston knob is actually held in place with a spring-loaded bayonet-style locking mechanism. And this is a really nice feature to see because it allows you to quickly access this rod without multiple turns. If you pull the piston knob back, you can now fill up the entire pen. Submerge the nib into ink. Pushing down on the piston rod will create a low-pressure system behind the head of the piston, and at the bottom of the barrel there is a flare-out which equalizes pressure and allows ink to draw up. In the hand, the pen is very comfortable, has decent heft due to that vacuum filling system, and is very well balanced. Although I will note, due to this step up in the section, if you tend to hold your pen a little bit further back, it may be a little bit uncomfortable. The cap posts deeply and securely. It transfers the weight a little bit further back in the hand, but it is comfortable for long writing sessions. Although one thing to note when posting the cap, make sure that you have the piston knob locked in place. If you have it unlocked and you post the cap, more often than not, when you remove the cap, the rod will come with it. In terms of size comparisons, here's the Pineider Avatar Twin Tank Touchdown, a Pilot G2 rollerball pen, and your typical Sharpie. Before we get into the disassembly of the Twin Tank Touchdown, I wanted to take a moment to compare it with a few other fountain pens. Up top, we have the Visconti Mirage Mythos, which is one of the most popular Italian-made fountain pens on the market today. Next, we have the Pilot Custom 823, which is probably the king of vacuum-filling fountain pens. And then lastly, we have the PenBBS 355, which is another translucent blue fountain pen, and it uses a bulk filler. When they're capped, the Pineider is the longest of the bunch. The 355 and the 823 are about the same length, and the Visconti is shorter than the rest of the pens. All pens feature pretty prominent cap bands, but the Pilot is the only one that has a bit of exposed plastic past the cap band. The Pineider and the Visconti are the only ones with spring-loaded clips. The other two are just bent metal clips. And let's take a look at these pens with their caps removed. The Visconti has a cap that pulls off and is held in place with a magnet. The Pilot 823 has a cap that unscrews in 1.5 turns. The PenBBS has a cap that unscrews in 1 and about 3/4 turns. And then the Pineider has a cap band held in place with a magnet that just pulls off. All pens, with the exception of the Pilot, have stainless steel number 6 size nibs. The Pilot has a 14-karat gold nib. When they're uncapped, the Pineider is again the longest of the bunch. The PenBBS and the Pilot are about the same length, and the Visconti is just a little bit shorter. The Visconti is the only one that's a cartridge converter system. The rest of these have shutoff valves in their filling systems. The Pilot Custom 823, in order to fully open the shutoff valve, you have to rotate the back piston knob 4 times. There we go. The PenBBS 355, you have to rotate this one 2 times. And the Pineider takes 1/4 turn thanks to that spring-loaded bayonet-style locking mechanism. Let's take a look at these pens with their caps posted. All caps post securely. The bulk filler is the longest pen when it's posted, followed by the Pineider, and then the Pilot and the Visconti are about the same length when they're posted. The Visconti is the only one that has a cap that secures in place with a magnet. The rest are friction fit. Disassembling the Pineider Twin Tank Touchdown, you are going to need some gripping materials and a thin flat-headed screwdriver. For me, this one, which is used for eyeglass repair, works just about perfectly. The cap pulls off, and if we take a look inside, we can see the entire inside of the cap is lined, so there shouldn't be a real need to disassemble this. I would just run it under warm water. The section unscrews from the barrel, and then the nib and feed can be unscrewed from the section. And those are held together with a nib collar. Placing your gripping materials on the feed and the nib, you can give them a pull, and soon those will come out. And then the nib and feed come right apart. And then next we have our barrel. Release the back piston knob, and at the front of the piston rod we can see there is a flat which you can grab a hold of with your screwdriver. Holding that in place, you can give the back piston knob a twist. Pretty soon that will come out, and inside you can see the spring. And then with our gripping material, grab a hold of the bayonet locking mechanism and give that a twist. And that will come out too. And then the rod itself can be pulled through the front of the barrel. And at this point, the pen is fully disassembled. To reassemble, we'll start with our barrel, and we'll put the rod back in place. Next, on the barrel, or on the rod I should say, we are going to attach our bayonet locking mechanism. We can screw that down onto the barrel. And then we are going to grab a hold of the front of the piston rod and screw down the piston knob. Good. And then we're going to take a look at the barrel and find the dot. And as we screw the bayonet style locking mechanism back down, we want to try and make sure that the lock is lined up with the dot. That looks just about perfect. At this point, the vacuum filling system should be fully functional. That looks like really good pressure. Next, we're going to grab our feed and our nib collar. The feed is keyed, so it will only go deeply into the nib collar in one orientation. We'll then place our nib on top and slide that in place. Again, being careful to make sure that the alignment is good. Next, we'll screw the nib collar into the section, and then the section onto our barrel. And lastly, our cap. And now we're ready to ink up. Inking up the twin tank touchdown, today I've selected Diamine Blue Velvet, which is one of my favorite vibrant blue inks. We'll take the cap off the bottle and the pen, release the bayonet style locking mechanism, and pull the rod back. Submerge the nib into ink and push down all the way until you reach the bottom stroke. That looks like a really nice full fill just from one stroke. This is a very efficient vacuum filling system. If we take a look, we can see the second tank is now filled. And if I give the piston knob a few taps, I can empty out that second chamber, and you can see that it is now completely locked from the rest of the barrel. If I then open up the back piston knob and give it a few pumps, we can see ink starting to flow in. There you go. I'm going to go ahead and wipe off the excess ink, cap up our pen, and our bottle. And now we're ready to write. Okay, writing with the Pineider Twin Tank Touchdown. Cap pulls off, and I am going to unlock the back piston knob in order to allow ink to flow from the barrel into the section, nib, and feed. And today we are writing with a medium stainless steel nib. And it's a nicely tuned nib. It has good flow and maybe a little bit of bounce, but not a huge amount. However, I have to preface that by saying, unfortunately, that's not how this pen came out of the box. I originally ordered this pen with a fine nib, and the fine nib actually had a small case of baby's bottom, which is a condition where if you're looking at a pen on paper, there's a bit of a gap between the two tines, and that prevents ink from flowing through. It's not an uncommon situation. It happens when you overly polish your nib tips, but it was a little bit disappointing to see. So I reached out to the store that I purchased this from and let them know of the condition, and they offered to send me a new nib. They asked if I still wanted a fine, and I asked if they could send me a medium instead. I found that the fine wrote just a little bit thinner than I prefer. And then I received this medium nib, and unfortunately, out of the box, the tines were a bit tight. So I took some brass shims and flossed those tines to spread them out. And now that I did, it writes beautifully, though I will say that it's a pretty similar line to that fine, so don't expect too much of a drastic variation between the fine and the medium version of this pen. Our ink is Diamine Blue Velvet. And for flex, I'm going to turn the page. As I mentioned, it's a pretty stiff nib. You can push out a little bit of line variation, but you can't ask for much. And for reverse writing, a little bit of a dry stroke there. There we go. So the feed mostly kept up. It did get a little bit dry, especially as I got to this T, but I would say if you were in a pinch, you could reverse write with this pen for a little bit thinner of a line. So what do I think of the Pineider Twin Tank Touchdown? I really like this pen. I think that it has a pretty striking and unique look, this flowy shape that tapers from the top finial all the way down to the bottom. It's quite distinctive and a nice pen to look at on your desk. I also like the fact that it's offered in different colors. You can get this in black, red, green, and the blue that we have here today, which means that it is a pen that you could certainly mix and match with your favorite ink colors. Personally, I found this pen to be quite comfortable in the hand. It's a very nice balance with decent heft. I do think that some people may have issue with this step up as we go from the section to the barrel, especially if you tend to hold your pens a little bit further back. That might be in the way of your grip. And I do like how it is posted. However, as I mentioned, if you're going to post this pen, make sure that the piston knob is locked in place. If you have it unlocked and you pull the cap out, it's more likely than not going to also pull out the piston rod, and you're going to end up with an inky mess. And I unfortunately would consider that a design flaw. As we look more at this cap, I like other features of it as well. I really enjoy the engraving that shows the Florence skyline. That reminds me that this pen was made in Italy every time I look at it. I also really like the magnetic closure. It feels very secure, but also is quite easy to pull off. And the clip, as I mentioned, is extremely functional. It has a very wide arch with a nice flare up at the end, and that spring-loaded action makes it so that you can easily get this over large folders and thick notebooks. So that's a great thing to see. However, I will say that I do have a little bit of issue with this clip in that because it's so long, it does have a tendency to look almost bent, especially in this view. It looks like it kind of bends off and to the left. And I spoke to that distributor that I bought this from, and they said that this is a pretty common characteristic of the pen. So if this is a detail that would bother you, you may want to take that into consideration. In terms of the filling mechanism, I'm a big fan of this. I love vacuum fillers, and this one has a huge ink supply. Also, that quick bayonet style locking mechanism makes it a real easy pen to live with. You don't have to unscrew the threads a bunch to open up the shutoff valve. It's just a very quick action. But I will say that I'm not a huge fan of the lock and unlock symbols that were used. There's nothing wrong with them, but because they don't go all the way around the pen, more often than not, I don't have them lined up with this dot. So I wish maybe what Pineider would have done is either not do these symbols at all, or do them all the way around the finial, so no matter where you have it positioned, you'll still be able to see that symbol. And then I would say probably my biggest nitpick with this pen is unfortunately the nib. It is a great performing nib now that I've gotten it tuned, but as I mentioned during this writing sample, it was a journey to get there. I started off with a fine that had baby's bottom, and then this medium just did not have very good flow. So especially at this price, that's quite disappointing to see. But with all that being said, I think that is a very attractive fountain pen, one that I enjoy looking at not only on my desk, but also one that I'm not afraid to travel with, because it has that huge ink supply and that ultra resin that's supposed to be virtually indestructible. I haven't personally put it to the test, but I have seen videos online, and I'll try to link a few in the description below that show people really trying to hammer this one out. And now that I've gotten the nib working, it is a very reliable writer, so I could certainly see keeping this pen for many years to come and traveling with this pen on road trips, in the air, and all around. And that just leaves me to say, thank you for watching.